In this video, I'm going to use this pile of gear, a PC card modem, and a Cisco 2600 router to create a mini dial-up ISP down here in my basement. Once we're online, I'll attempt to relive what a dial-up connection was like by trying to get a local Napster server running, and then we'll do something I haven't done in over 20 years. Use a dial-up connection to chat over AOL Instant Messenger, or AIM, with my wife. We'll even get to hear her memories about what dial-up and AIM were like back in the early 2000s. Let's get into it. I have acquired what I think I will need to get this Homelab dial-up going. I have a computer with a modem. I would like to plug a phone cable into said modem and get this thing on the network and online. Now this thing's running Windows 7. I can't get Windows XP to install on here. Windows 7 is a little late for dial-up experiments, and I think it might give us some trouble. I do have another Windows XP tower, but it's too new to have a modem. So I do have a couple of these USB modems that maybe will work in that Windows XP machine if I can't get the laptop to work. The only other retro or real modem, I guess you could say, I have is this Hayes smart modem. And of course, I don't have the power supply. It's got some weird AC deal going on in the back, so I don't even know if it works. And I don't have a computer to plug it into anyway. We'll figure out the computer modem situation, but I want to be able to take a computer with a modem and plug it in and get on the network. So where do I plug this phone line in? That's where these ATAs, or analog telephone adapters, come in. An ATA takes your analog telephone signal, also known as POTS, P-O-T-S, stands for plain old telephone system because, well, it's been that way since the late 1800s. So you'll hear some people refer to these as POTS jacks, and it gets it on the network, translates it from analog to digital and back if you wish. So these ATAs bridge the gap from analog to digital, getting your modems either to another modem or something more complicated. Now the gear you're going to need to do dial-up at home is going to depend on your use case. Maybe you just want to connect two computers up via their modems, get them talking to each other, transferring data, play a game of Doom or something. All you need is an ATA to get them a phone line to interact with over. I, however, would like to go what I would call more of a mini ISP route. So I have this Cisco 2600 router, and I can plug in this phone jack adapter on the back. I'll show you that. We'll get that all installed and configured. And what's going to happen is I'll be able to dial into this as if I'm dialing into a real ISP, and I'll be able to access my actual home network and the internet and everything as if I'm dialing up back like I would back in the day. Now you don't have to go this whole network gear route. You can actually just get another computer, something running Windows 2000 or something, and host a dial-up server, and it'll pretend to do all that stuff. And that's totally another legit route you could take. I'm going to reference several guides today that I'm following. One is by Mattia. They just so happen to be a viewer and patron. Their guide is great to give you a big overview of all your options and where you can go for more information. I have another guide I'm going to follow from the serial port. They're really covering this Cisco configuration and what I need to do over here. And then yet another guide from Cathode Ray Dude that goes over all the pretty confusing settings you need to give this ATA. If you think this Cisco networking gear is complicated, well, these ATA, VoIP, and phone line guys are on a whole nother level. Let me show you. There are plenty of these ATAs you can find online that will work for this purpose. I picked up a pair of these SPA 2102-Rs 4 years ago, actually. I got them for $18 each shipped. They're still that price, actually, from the same seller. And these happen to also be routers, so they'll actually run a whole network if you want. We're not going to use that, but we'll interact with it as we configure the thing. And so as I was looking through the guides, I was pretty excited. I was like, man, I've got some of these, hiding away in a box. And then I was getting a little nervous the further I dug into it. These can be pretty locked down. Definitely only buy ones that have the Linksys and Cisco branding or the original branding on it. They can be locked down to a particular provider, is my understanding. And it's pretty cumbersome to reset these. You need to actually plug in a real phone, and you can factory reset it that way. And sometimes that won't necessarily work if it's super locked down. So I would recommend just picking up one of these ATAs that has a factory hard reset button, and then you're not going to be in any sort of trouble. So I'm going to get this thing plugged in directly to a Windows XP machine that we can control the IP of, and we'll throw it on my actual network. It's got LED indicators on the front for power and what it calls internet. Let me show you the back here again. Remember, this is a router, so this is basically the WAN port. That's going to my network, and it's got its internal network that it's gonna, route and do natting for and everything over here, the yellow jack. Fun aside, my Unify router recognizes this thing, calls it a Sapura SPA. I guess that's the manufacturer that Cisco was probably paying to build this thing. And it even has a little picture of what it thinks it is, which is more than I can say about other stuff. It thinks a USB and Ethernet hub up on my MacBook is a Whirlpool oven. Over here on the Windows XP machine, we can see it has assigned us an address of 192.168.0.3 on the interface I plugged it into, because remember, that thing's a router, so it's running a DHCP server and giving out IPs. Now, at least in the case of my units, they host their admin interface at .0.1, so we can hit that here, and here is the beautiful Linksys phone adapter configuration page. Here's where I was getting a little nervous. Mine appears to have been factory reset, so I can go click admin login, and I'm immediately able to go to advanced settings and go over here to voice and change anything I need. So I got lucky. There is a procedure to plug a phone in and stuff, but don't have to deal with that. Now these are going to be the settings I got from the Cathode Ray Dude articles, which are incredibly helpful. I'll post links to the guides I'm using down in the description. I've already set this up, but I'll breeze through a couple of the highlights. You can see there's line 1 and line 2, which correspond to the physical jacks on the back of the unit. Couple key settings, you're going to want make call without reg and answer call without reg. Yes, yes. Down under audio configuration, anything that has fax in the name and the option to turn off and say no, go ahead and do that. And then we have the dial plan. This basically can configure how the device behaves. All I have to say about it is I'm glad I didn't have to figure it out myself. It's in the guides. And basically, if I'm more or less understanding what I'm looking at, this is an arbitrary number I've chosen. And so basically it's saying, when line 1 dials this number, ring the other port. So each of these lines, 1 and 2, have port numbers. Line 1 is 5060. Line 2 is 5061 by default. That's why I'm thinking mine is at least in a more or less factory configuration, or maybe administrators always leave these as typical port numbers, I'm not sure. But the important bit is, when port 1 dials this number, ring the other port. One other thing you're going to have to do is set a unique user ID on each line. Again, all in the guide. And then if we go take a look at line 2, it also has a dial plan, but it's saying, when I ring this number, call the other guy. So the ports are basically configured to call each other when the number is dialed. So with that configured, what's going to happen is I can theoretically plug a computer into one end. We'll configure the Cisco router and plug it into the other. And when this one dials the number, the other one automatically will pick up. So it's just simulating a phone network for us here. This video is going to be my pretty simple foray into all of this. Theoretically, we could get this one on the network as well and configure these in such a way that my laptop is in here. They're on the network. This one's over in the rack, with the router. And then the analog signal will travel over the network. That's actually what these are designed to do. But if you're just setting this up and you're playing around, you only need one. You can just make these phone lines talk to each other that way. So let's hook up the world's worst, crappiest phone that maybe I've ever seen. Kind of bought this last minute on Amazon. Something kind of annoying. You won't get a dial tone, and this thing doesn't do its job unless it's on the internet side of the network. So you have to have that plugged in. Otherwise, you won't even get a dial tone. It's very frustrating because I'm not even using that feature, but watch out for that. So hopefully I'll be able to get this on mic. So we have a dial tone. It immediately goes busy, as you heard, but you haven't heard those sounds in a while because this one's not answering fast enough. In fact, let's go play around in the settings with that. Back in the configuration, I think in the SIP, people call it SIP section, there's a timer value. And I think T1 is how long it's going to wait. So let's change this from 0.5 to 5 and see if that makes a difference. This is just purely for academic purposes. I don't know if this is going to hurt or hinder our dial-up plans. That actually didn't make a difference. And of course it didn't. Like, I was picking this up, getting a dial tone and then a busy signal because I'm not interacting fast enough. Like, I'm not even dialing out for this guy to not pick up. You know what I mean? So of course that's something else going on there. Speaking of, Why did I not buy another phone? We could have had way more fun. And better troubleshooting. I don't even know if this works. I'm not even going to know if this works until I get a Cisco ISP router config going. When I pick up the phone, the activity light for that line goes busy, which makes sense. That actually will help us when we're debugging later with the router. Side note about phone cables, it pained me deeply to buy these, by the way. Growing up, we had boxes and boxes of these. couldn't get rid of them. This one at least is the original traditional gray. I like that. So you may have noticed the one that came with my totally piece of crap phone, it's only got 2 wires in it, but it still works somehow. These are slightly nicer, and they've got 4 wires. Well, basically, I think there were some traditional uses for the other 2. A long time ago, they figured out they could use pots over 2 wires, and a lot of phone lines were going to houses with 4 wires in them, and then suddenly you could deliver 2 lines over 1 wire because you only needed 2 internal wires per line. Anyway, long story short, I could theoretically, if I, terminated the ends and had the right equipment, I could deliver 2 phone lines over this 1 cable. Got the ATA as configured as I can get it until I have 2 things to plug into it. So let's move our attention to this Cisco router. This is a Cisco 2610 from the 2600 series. I think it came out in 1998. So pretty good time period to do dial-up stuff with. And it's got 2 expansion slots on the back for WAN interface cards. Again, I'm wondering, do you call those wicks? Are these wicks? I picked up one of these WIC 1AM V2s. It's got a single line I'm going to be able to use, and my computer will be able to dial up into this thing. We'll be able to configure a user on the router, just like an ISP. You'll see a lot of people using the 2AM cards. They have 2 lines, line 0 and 1, instead of the pass-through phone port I've got here. Mine just has the 1. This is for a phone that you would plug in when this one isn't in use. And yeah, it would have been nice to have the 2-port card for expansion purposes, but I got these because they're cheap. I picked up 3 of them. It was like $8 each, shipped to my door in 2 days. It was great. I paid $30 shipped for this 2600. That's not a good deal. Try to find a better deal. But all of that is to say, $30, $18, $8. For less than $60, you could do this yourself. Assuming you have computers with modems or you buy one of these little USB deals. Here are the 2 WAN interface card expansion ports on the back. This one is currently rocking 2 T1 CSU GSU cards. And in fact, there's another expansion bay here. You could put like more fast Ethernet ports in. This only came with 1. Let's get this guy out. What the? It's broken. What the heck? Quick note about the 2-port versus 1-port. You can see my 1 ports have 1 chip populated, where the 2 ports would clearly have another one. Should be as simple as getting that guy in there just like that. I am going to want it on my network because this thing is going to provide dial-up access to my internal home network and the internet. And I'm realizing I probably have not been explaining that very well. Basically, a computer is going to be able to dial in to this thing. We're going to configure it with a username and password that you're going to have to type in and get right, obviously. We'll dial in. This thing's going to have a pool of IPs configured, so it'll give the computer an IP address, and that thing should be able to get on the internet and go off and talk to other devices on my network, which is important for later in the video. Bad news, this thing will not boot with this card in here. I'm talking like 1 LED on the front, blank terminal screen, not even the boot ROM. And I'm pretty sure it's solvable. This thing has an ancient version of iOS. I think it's like 25 years old. And in fact, it's definitely older than what the documentation says we need for this. So we're gonna go on a little side mission. It boots with the card pulled, of course, and I exaggerated a little bit. If we do show version, we are actually running Cisco iOS 12.1 from 2001. So, not that old. And if we do a dir flash, we can see there's our bin 12.1. So we need 12.2 at least. And I'm just going to throw 12.3 on there. We've got this many bytes free. That's about 12 megabytes. This is important because over here on a TFTP server on the network, I've got this guy, a 12.3 bin of iOS, and it is 7.1 megs. So it should fit on the flash along with the existing bin. I think it's pretty important to check that. Now we need to be able to talk to that TFTP server. So if we do a show IP int brief, we can see that the one Ethernet port is down. And we can see the T1 card has an IP address. I had been using this to do a point-to-point T1 link in another video. Check that out if you haven't seen it. So we are going to configure that interface and give it an IP address. 1.200 should be available on my network. No shut to bring it up, hopefully. Now if we do a show IP int brief, we have an IP. And my TFTP server is at 82, I think. There we go. Now, I have never actually upgraded iOS over TFTP and done this whole thing, but it should be pretty straightforward. We do a copy TFTP, and then we want it in Flash. We know that our TFTP server is there. We want it to bring down our new version of iOS. That's fine. Oh. You can erase the flash before copying. Yeah, see what happens. I don't need that old version anyway. I've got it backed up. So if you're going to erase the flash like this before pulling it over, you just need to make sure you have enough total flash space for the new bin. It's done, and let's take a look. It is sitting there. So we're going to want to do a boot system. It might have already done this, but we're going to be super careful. We're going to issue that. Oops. I think we need to be configuring the terminal to do that. Okay, let's write that out. So let's reload, and hopefully we will boot to the new iOS version. Decompressing an image. That's hopefully a good sign. There we go. Version 12.3. It is trying to boot. Perfect. Let's turn it off, throw that card back in. If this doesn't work, a lot more troubleshooting, I guess. Not sure what I'm going to do. Black screen still. Okay. I'm going to try one of the other cards I bought, I guess. I think that first card is bad. I just swapped in a new one. Glad I bought 3 of them. I swapped in a new one and we're getting a little, we're booting. So, hopefully. Good and bad news. Unknown WIC in slot 01. So we can boot, but this version of iOS still doesn't know what to do with this thing. Well, at least we can boot. I had pulled this T1 card to troubleshoot and make sure it wasn't the slot. This is the other card. It's working, well, it can be detected. We can't use it yet. And this is the bad one. I've marked it for myself. I did think that was suspicious that we were just getting a black screen, nothing. Usually, even when it can't detect a card, you get the behavior we're getting now where it just says, I see it, but I don't know what to do with it. Or maybe you don't get to iOS when a card is faulty, but the bootloader would still, at least give you something on the screen. So that was pretty suspicious. This thing must be toast. I thought I was being clever with 12.3, but I'm just going to go ahead and copy over and install this exact version that it says supports my card for 2600, and we'll see where we get. I think I'm running the exact version that Cisco says supports it. I didn't get a warning, but if I do a show diag in that slot, it's got unknown WAN daughter card. What do I do about this? Ooh, we might be saved. I found the latest 12.3 version that I could, and it's saying it knows about 2 terminal lines and 2 serial network interfaces. Show diag shows in slot 0 a single port modem WIC. Yes. Okay. So I think I played myself. All that documentation I was reading about these WIC 1AM and 2AM modules doesn't say anything about this V2 right here. All of mine are WIC 1AM V2. I think I was reading documentation for V1, presumably, where that just wasn't even there. And so I needed a way later version of iOS. But I think we're in the clear. We were about to go way off script with this thing. But we'll save this beast for another day and learn how to configure dial-up on the, hopefully, much simpler 2600 here with the single ports. I ran a physical phone line to my room with the rack on it so I could put the 2600 over there. I was tired of listening to it. And the irony is not lost on me that I have these VoIP adapters, which should theoretically be deshackling me from the physical constraints of my analog infrastructure, and I ran a line anyway. But I just want to deal with one of them for now, so we're starting simple. I'm going to enter a whole ton of configuration commands on the router to hopefully get this working based on the serial ports guide. I'm not going to make you watch me do that, so when we come back, I'll be done and I'll show you some highlights. It's about 4 hours later, and the debugging process has escalated. The config has been input. I think it's sound. I started with the Windows 7 machine just on its internal modem here, and when I dial in with the user and password I configured, it goes off and dials for a little bit, gets to the verifying user and password, and you'll notice during that dialing, where's all the screeching sounds? Well, this internal modem doesn't inform a speaker to actually output all that sound. So here we go, we've failed. What I did to start debugging was I turned on debug PPP off and debug PPP negotiation on the router. What this should do is spit out a bunch of text to the console whenever a computer is actually trying to authenticate with the router and dial in. I was getting nothing with the Windows 7 laptop, so I moved on to this Dell USB modem converter in my Windows XP machine here, and basically it's the exact same story. Nothing on the console, just failed to dial up. The only success I'd seen up to this point is I tried to dial in with another of these USB modems on my Windows 11 machine, of all setups, and I saw signs of life in the console. A bunch of these LCP timeout state REQ sent. I think what's happening here is the router has accepted the connection and it's challenging for off from the modem, and something's going wrong on the modem side. It's like not responding or something. That led me to consider something I was nervous about the whole time, that maybe my ATA, my particular ATA, which this specific one is not in any of the setup guides, just really similar ones, is introducing too much noise or trying to cancel too much noise. So in Cathode Ray Dude's article, there is a troubleshooting section to turn off even more noise canceling, echo cancellation, stuff like that. So I went off and did that. The theory being that these things are trying to take an analog signal, make it digital, and then immediately convert it back from digital to analog. And they're trying to do all sorts of smart stuff like ignore pauses and clean up the wire. And a lot of modems just aren't going to like that behavior. So I tried to clean up those settings, and suddenly I could see the exact same authentication timeout request thing from the Windows XP machine. So the configuration on the router seems sane. And I was afraid of this the whole time, that I wasn't going to have the right hardware, whether it was the ATA or old enough modems and OSs to do this. There's comments online about, even Windows Vista not working, and I'm stuck with XP and a USB modem and Windows 7 on a laptop. So then the most collab retro solution ever came up. An old 3-COM PCMCIA card, 56K modem, inside the Windows 7 machine. So this guy obviously slides in right here, and it's got a cord coming off with the phone jack. So with that plugged in, you can go to the ISP dial-up I've got going on here. Now, if you have multiple modems, you're going to want to actually select the right one. So this, I think, is the one I want. And now, if we dial in, this thing actually takes control of the internal speaker and blows it out. So get ready. Well, that's annoying. I just successfully dialed up off camera like several times with this. Maybe this dongle's going bad. Let's try another one. This is one of the fancy little flip out deals. Believe it or not, you slide that in, pop out your connector, and you're ready to party. Let's try this again. There we go. As the username and password is verifying, a bunch of the debug logging is streaming across the router. And finally, at the end, we can see we were assigned an IP, 172.16.1.6. We should be able to ping the internet, Google. We can. We should be able to ping things on my network. This is that TFTP server we were using. We can. Well, let's go to google.com. This is real time. See what I mean? Like, this sucked. But here we are. We are online with my own personal ISP. So exciting. So I think the takeaway here is you might run into hardware issues. Everything about dial-up tends to be hard. My ATA could be part of the problem here. It might be messing up the analog signal just enough to frustrate newer stuff. Also, I think it's less about the OS version, because I did see my Windows 11 machine actually successfully try to connect one time. I think it's more about your modem hardware. So I don't know what went wrong with this one. This was working fine like minutes ago. But basically, it is my uninformed opinion that older modems are going to be more lenient about line noise and degraded quality between the connections and things like that. They're just going to tolerate more of that because that was the reality back then. And these newer, USB to modem converters, they're going to want the world to be pretty precise. So that's just my theory. That's what I think's going on. Well, let me give you a little tangent about why you would even go through all this pain in the first place. You might be wondering, especially if you're young enough or maybe caught dial-up at the tail end of it, why does everyone get so excited about it? There's an inevitable progression for a tech channel like mine with computers or networking, especially with a retro bent. Inevitably, you're down here trying to get dial-up working in your basement like I am in this video. And when people hear the sound, you know what I'm talking about. When the two modems are trying to negotiate their line speed, people go crazy. Why is that? Well, the obvious first simple answer is nostalgia. So it reminds you who you were back then and what your experience using the internet was. My first experience using the internet was with dial-up on a Windows 95 machine. And for many years, the act of dialing up on a Windows 95 or Windows 98 machine was what the internet experience was to me. And in fact, you were using a scarce resource. You probably had one phone line going to your house. Your parents wanted to be on the phone. Your siblings wanted to be on the phone. Back then, computers were very expensive, so you had at best one computer, meaning when you were logged on using the internet, you were probably the only one in your household doing so, and no one else could use the telephone. Which leads to maybe another nostalgia aspect, which is more psychological. Because of the physical constraints of the dial-up medium, the phone line, you had to actively choose to log on, get your computer on the internet, do whatever you needed to do, and log off. And if you were a kid like me, you might use the internet 1 hour, 2 hours a day, maybe not even every day. For better or worse, we've sort of lost that. Trust me, back then we never wanted to get offline, so we kind of got what we wished for. Look down at your phone and think about what would it be like to use the internet for only 2 hours every day? Well, for one, you'd be way more excited about it, and it'd be a way more special experience. That's what it felt like when we were dialing up back in the day. That's kind of where the rosy nostalgia ends for me. Dial-up sucked. My house was built in the late 60s, the house I grew up in. You were at the whims of the quality of the phone line. I rarely ever got 33 kilobits per second. It was usually much slower, and sometimes it just wouldn't work. You couldn't go on the internet that day. Insult to injury, my house that I grew up in had dial-up well after 2006. We didn't get a broadband connection until after 2006, I think. I think I was in college. All my friends, my peer group, and everyone in my area had a broadband connection maybe 2001, 2002, and we were way behind. So from a speed perspective, I have no rosy memories of it. But my parents were divorced, and my dad did have a broadband connection. So my two brothers and I would load up our 3 CRTs, 3 towers, everything we needed, get him in the car, go over to dad's on some weekends, get hooked up as fast as we could, and we would spend every waking minute online, downloading stuff, playing video games online with friends. We were so desperate for a fast connection. But that all adds to my nostalgia towards dial-up, good and bad. I don't think nostalgia always has to be good. So this is just a little peek into why, at least from my context, people get kind of excited about dial-up. It was from a time back when the internet was still very new. It was changing rapidly all the time. And there was this obvious disconnect and connect of going online and getting offline. It was more of a special experience.
But again, what is the point of all this if we're not going to continue to try to relive some of the past? So I was thinking of a few ways, or pain points maybe, I wanted to experience dial-up again with. And one of them was definitely trying to download MP3s, legally of course, from Napster, or LimeWire, or Morpheus, or Kazaa. At any rate, I wanted to try to get a local Napster server going, get 2 clients on there, one of them being the host I'm dialing in with, to illustrate just exactly how painful it was to try to download one song. Now, I spent the better part of a weekend on this, and as of yet, I haven't gotten it working. I still think the journey and everything I learned is going to be interesting, so I'm going to go over that now briefly. But if you really want to skip that and see something that's actually going to work, for sure, a little hint on the screen here, I'll put some timestamps down below and you can skip ahead, and you might even get to meet my wife. So we're looking at Napster V2 Beta 6, and if you're not familiar with Napster, or you forgot about it, it was one of the first music sharing tools to come on the scene. It was never as popular as later peer-to-peer networks like LimeWire or Kazaa, but it has a certain stranglehold on the, piracy and overall nostalgic dial-up community as being super important, probably because it was the first one and they got cracked down super hard. The downfall here for Napster was that there was a server acting as the liaison between the person hosting the MP3 file and the person downloading it, rather than a peer-to-peer network like LimeWire or Kazaa, where it was just, you and I's computers talking to each other and no centralized spot that the government could shut down. At any rate, Napster is relevant because back in 2000, 2001, right when it was getting shut down, lots of people still had dial-up. And if you were going to download a 3.5-minute song, let's say it was like a 3.5 megabyte MP3 file, and you're in the ideal situation where your dial-up connection is 33 kilobits per second, it's going to take you like 14, 15 minutes to download this song, which sounds, reasonable until you think about the fact that we're just streaming songs all the time, along with a bunch of other media. And let me tell you, it wasn't always ideal scenario. I remember it taking 1 or 2 hours, or sometimes you had to pause it, disconnect, go to bed, come back the next day, reconnect, and Napster, certain versions of Napster were smart enough to resume. So we're talking like multiple days to get your Sir Mix-a-Lot song. Luckily enough, someone reverse engineered the Napster servers and they open sourced it. It's written in C. It's called OpenNap and it's from 2001. So I've got OpenNap compiled here on an Ubuntu server, lovingly named Big Ubuntu. It's the largest VM I have. I do all my coding on it. So I'm going to start up OpenNap and there it goes. It starts up on port 8888 and it spits out a bunch of information about what it's up to. Something that caught me up is there's another server process you need to start called metaserver. So we'll start that up. It spits out nothing about what it's up to. You can ask it its version, I think, yeah. So you can get a little information, but metaserver doesn't tell you a whole lot about what it's up to. We'll get to that in a second. That server I just started up OpenNap on is on 192.168.1.212. And with a lot of trial and error, I figured out that Napster, the clients, are trying to talk to server.napster.com and occasionally server2.napster.com. So we put this in our Windows host file, which means if I come in here and try to ping server.napster.com, it's going to redirect to 192.168.1.212, the server we're hosting OpenNap on. So let's start up Napster Music Community. They were really dreaming with that. You can't just click yes. You have to scroll down because they knew they were getting sued. And then I remember this, it made you choose a connection speed and it actually passes that to the server. So we'll go next. We get this connecting to server, checking version, failure. Over on my OpenNap server, I see nothing about this, even though I'm, running this in debug mode and everything. I've been grabbing my versions of Napster from oldversion.com. Last weekend, I was trying every single one of these to see where I could get, and I'm not worried about viruses because this guy wouldn't do me wrong. And there definitely were older beta versions of Napster 2 that were trying to run on ports other than the defaults from OpenNap. So fired up Wireshark. Let's get this started. We'll do a filter on TCP only. Start up Napster Music Community. Let it do its thing. And then over here, we can see for sure, this machine I'm on right now is 1.43. It's trying to talk to my OpenNap server on 8875. That theoretically is this meta server thing. So there were beta versions that were trying to talk on 8876. So you had to change the port. In fact, you can change the port very easily with the P flag 8876. Now it's running there for other weird versions of your Napster client. And luckily, since we're open source, the meta server isn't very talkative. It doesn't log anything, but its default port is 8875, which seems to be what my version of Napster is trying to do. And you can see it's got this defaults to port 8888. So I don't quite understand it, but the meta server somehow talks to this other server that's running on my left here, the OpenNap server. Not really sure how it works. So this obviously wasn't working. And there's a fork of OpenNap called OpenNap NG from a few years later, like 04, 05 or something like that. And theoretically, it fixes some bugs and everything. So I tried that out. So I couldn't find the Linux sources, but I found the Windows installer. And so here I am on another Windows XP VM running OpenNap NG. And you can see I've been pretty busy trying a ton of different Napster versions to get this to work. And the host file on this one is as you would expect. I'm telling all the Napster calls to go to this exact machine. If you're not familiar with a host file, whenever anything on this machine tries to talk to server.napster.com, actually redirect that to this machine. Don't go out to the internet. And if I fire up Napster v20 beta 6 here, it works. And you might even remember this UI. Let me maximize this. So you could search, find some songs. This was the transfer UI to see who you were sending songs to, who you were getting songs from. There's a chat, which I don't personally remember using. Like, I can set up a chat room. Let's see, create one here and say, I don't know, collab chat. And so, yeah, there's like this IRC component. I don't remember using this in Napster. Comment down below if you were chatting on Napster a lot. But yeah, I can say get user information. So I have like an admin user on the server called Collab, and it knows that that person is offline and it's an elite level user. That's the Napster server version of like a super admin. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure how I got this particular client into this configuration. It's clearly able to authenticate. I can disconnect from the server. I can connect. Everything's good to go. It's talking to OpenNAP-NG. And I cannot, for the life of me, get that to happen on another VM. And all of this is pointless unless I have two instances of Napster running, because one of them needs to host the MP3 and one of them needs to download it. So just to drive the point home, if we give up on the Ubuntu server and we point this XPVM at the one I was just showing you, who's hosting OpenNAP-NG, let's restart Napster, agree to their terms. It'll still just not get far enough. I'm not entirely, like, I was rapidly changing between all these Napster versions and servers, and somehow I tricked this one into logging in. So I think I have a theory. Fire up regedit. Regedit, by the way, is like a database that Windows has for all the settings for Windows itself and all the software you have installed. So for example, Napster has saved a current user value of Collab Retro. That's who I tried to log in with. And it's made a folder called Collab Retro. And there's a ton of different stuff in here. So my theory is I'm going to be able to take this and export it. Call it something like Napster user on the desktop, I guess. And maybe import it into the other Napster client on this VM where I can't get it to work. And it might be enough to trick this client into going further with the server. Let's see. Got those exported registry settings on the desktop here on the machine that's not working. And I think I just drag it like that. And now this thing has the exact same settings as the other one. Now there might be some security settings or some sort of checking it does, and this just isn't going to work, but let's find out. So we'll launch Napster and see what we get. Yeah, I don't think so. Nothing. Just for completeness, I did try LimeWire on each one because I thought theoretically I could do the direct connect. So I should be able to just do something like this. Connect to that VM you're seeing in the background there. Doesn't work. I've removed every single firewall setting I can find. We'll have to revisit peer-to-peer file sharing someday. So that was a bummer. Now the obvious next step is to have to turn my brain on and actually go look at the OpenNAP source. I can compile it and build it and add logs and everything and try to understand where we're stopping. But I don't feel like doing that right now, so we'll have to revisit this another day. Well, let's try something that's gonna work. There happens to be a recent open source version of the AOL Instant Messenger server. It's under active development. The maintainer is very responsive. I thought I was having an issue and they responded, within minutes. So definitely recommend this one. It's got tons of support. It's as simple as downloading one of the releases and running the run shell script. So I have a server running right now. Then all you have to do is get an AIM client installed, go to setup, connection, point the host at the IP of the machine you're running the open source server on. And it's configured in a really user-friendly way. You can type in any screen name and any password and it'll just let you in. Because really that's all we're doing. We're just messing around with something like this. So we can log in and here we are. Bet you haven't seen that in a long time. Oh, one of my buddies is online. Let's see what he's up to. What the heck? Anyway, you can see it works just fine. So let's use the dial-up connection to do something I haven't done in 20 years. Talk to my wife over AIM.
I'm trying to copy the 2.4 megabyte AIM installer off of my NAS over the dial-up connection. Windows 7 won't even tell you how fast it's going. I really wish I had a older computer to try this on Windows 95 or Windows 98. Okay, got it installed. We're gonna sign on with the dial-up connection. And you'll notice it takes quite a bit longer than when I was messing around on those VMs. Real time here. We're on, and my wife's online. This really is my wife, by the way. I talked her into getting on one of those Windows XP VMs. Ooh, buddy icon. So, you kind of have one shot. I'm going to hit her with a classic. Gonna shoot my shot, guys. What are you doing after school tomorrow? What do we do here? I wasn't fast enough. She's gone. I talked my wife into coming down here. She's real. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why AIM was such a big deal. So what do you remember about dialing up, and like why was it so exciting to get on AIM back then?
It was really the only way to talk to your friends without going through a parent.
No cell phones.
Yeah, no cell phones.
For a long time. In the early 2000s, no cell phones. We got together after college, by the way, but we've known each other forever. So really 20 years ago, we were talking on AIM like countless hours way back then. When did you have dial-up back then? Or did you got broadband pretty soon though, if I recall?
We had dial-up forever. So if one of your parents ever needed to use the phone, sometimes they wouldn't even tell you. You would be chatting on AIM, and then your connection would just be dead. Or you would need to use the phone and your parents would be online and you'd pick up the phone and you just hear the, whatever that thing is.
The sound.
The sound.
You guys heard that earlier in the video.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to say about it was with AIM, you always knew everybody was sitting right at their computer. It was kind of always like a live interaction. Whereas like now everything is very asynchronous. You send a text, most people don't expect an immediate response. Or even like when you're slacking at work, everyone's pretty asynchronous.
Yeah.
But AIM was always very like real time. That's why you were always had all these phrases to be like, I'll be right back. I gotta go. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, we didn't show it, but there's like away messages you could set to show that you were briefly away. And that was like a whole subculture in and of itself, crafting the perfect away message.
Mm-hmm.
And as broadband became more popular, people would stay online and you could go idle. I think your name would go gray in the list or something.
It would italicize, I think, or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh, this person has an internet connection that they can leave on all the time. That must be pretty nice.
They're rich.
They have broadband. Because with dial-up, you couldn't do that. Like you just had to sign off, which was much more what you're talking about. The immediate, like when you were online using AIM, you knew almost everyone you were talking to was like there for that purpose as well.
Yes.
The conversation was really quick, as fast as the connection would let you.
Yes.
Basically.
I have a question for you.
Oh, really?
How many friends did you have?
Oh, in my buddy list?
Yeah. How big was your buddy list?
That's a good question. I don't remember. I mean, at least 50-ish.
Oh my God.
But never that many were online. Like, if I can remember right, like you'd log in and a good night would be like 12 people where, 15 friends were online but they're also like, they're ready to talk, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a little different than going on like a chat service today.
Yeah, so then you'd have like all these windows open, one for each chat.
One for each
and
buddy
it could get kind
open.
of overwhelming. I remember my computer could only fit like 6 chats, so if there was ever more than that, it was very
you're right. Yeah, you would arrange them on the screen so that you could like see all 6 at once or whatever. And then later clients came that made tabs. Like third party. I don't know if you ever did that. Mm-mm. But what replaced AIM? I think it was Facebook for me. Facebook and cell phones. Because we could start texting.
Facebook, yeah.
In like 06. When we got into college, we got Facebook accounts.
Yeah, because the first cell phones we got, you couldn't really... We had limits on the amount of text you could send. So like you would never just be like, what's up? Like I'm not wasting a text on that.
Yeah, one of my 200 for the month or whatever.
Nah. Yeah. These texts were all like action-based, maxed out characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dense.
Whereas AIM, you could tell whole stories to each other. So yeah, I guess that's it.
That's it.
I hope you enjoyed following along as I got this set up. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. I've got more plans for this dial-up network, starting with older gear. So Windows 7 is just a little too new to experience what dial-up like truly felt like back then. A Windows 95 and Windows 98 machine, even Windows ME, would be more accurate. And if you'd really like to support the channel, I'm on Patreon. I post behind the scenes type content and sneak peeks about ideas I'm cooking up. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.